Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Atheist Reformation Sunday service. We've got Harry over there desperately trying to break his neck so that I won't do it for him later. Just losing his mind, apparently.
I've given up all hope.
Well, I mean, yeah, that sounds about right. You probably should, so.
You've done it, everyone. You've finally killed my spirit. Two
I
months of
mean,
isolation and then not being able to do anything still. It's shook me. I am shook.
you are shook?
Yes.
Huh. Well, I mean, I can kind of understand that. I mean, you cram people into their houses and don't let them do anything for months on end. Yeah, you're probably gonna get some some screwed up stuff going on there. I mean, most likely. So everybody, welcome to the show. Everybody who's watching, all one of you right now. But hey, thanks for tuning in.
We love you, person.
Sure, why not? Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, follow the Atheist Reformation on Facebook at facebook.com/the Atheist Reformation. And, of course, all articles, or in this case, the article, is linked in the video description down below so that you can see and follow along if you'd like to. By no means have to, but it does tend to help sometimes. And also, after you've liked, commented, and subscribed, remember to hit that notification bell icon. Let you know when we got more content coming up, new videos coming out, when the next show's coming on. You know, things. When things happen, you get notified. That's how that works.
It basically tells you when we are really in need of attention, and when we are at our most desperate, we will send you a notification, and then you can pay attention to us.
No, that's not how that works at all.
Oh.
It's just anytime we post new content or anytime we go live, it'll notify people. It's just, I mean, unless you routinely just absolutely like reach your peak neediness for attention at 6 p.m. every Sunday.
I do. I'm very regular.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know if there's a fiber like supplement for neediness, but apparently there is, and Harry's on it. So if you want to regulate that and, you know, nip that in the bud, so to speak, talk to Harry. That's not it, no.
It's fiber for the soul.
No, you eat all of that, and it's more likely you'll die from an impacted colon. So anyway, let's go ahead and jump right into the thick of it today. Um, we're going to be talking about this one story today, and it's where will the next decade take religion? So this is supposed to be experts predicting the future of faith. And this comes to us from religionnews.com. This came out a little earlier in the year, first part of January. So this is before the whole COVID-19 kickoff and whatnot. But I still think a good chunk of this should be at least somewhat relevant. And we get a little bit of a preliminary look at things such as the last decade from 2010 to 2019. You know, saw the re-election of the country's first black president, election of the first election of the first president to call for an outright ban on Muslims entering the country. All happened in the same year, though that second statement might not be completely accurate. Um, Marked by world-shaking events, movements such as the Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, and the Me Too movement. Migrant crises at the U.S. southern border, as well as in Africa and Asia. The rise of bots and social media disinformation campaigns. Um, the legalization, well, I would say more the recognition of same-sex marriage, based on the Supreme Court statement on that. It's that it was always legal. Why are you coming to us? Why do we have to say this? But, matched by a revolution in the way Americans think about gender and sexuality, the death of Osama bin Laden, and the rise and fall of the Islamic State group ISIL and ISIS. Terrorist attacks, school shootings, violent attacks upon houses of worship, movement on the legalization of marijuana, and the beginning of the Syrian civil war, controversial hearings on American Muslim radicalization, and the launch of federal countering violent extremism programs, and new attention to mental health among countless of the trends, movements, and headlines. So some of those did have some religious implications, primarily in the Islamic world more than anything else, though the Me Too movement arguably could be considered to have some impact on the religious world when talking about women leading worship services and things like that. And it looks like we lost Harry for the time being, but I'm sure he will be right back once he fixes his phone and unscrews that portion of it. But looking into this, what's the next decade going to hold for us? And here's Harry back. Harry, what the hell did you do?
Honestly, I think I might have fell asleep because while you were reading it, it just sounded.
Okay, so it looks like Harry is having some connection issues.
Okay. Text it, don't call. Bye.
Oh, fun.
How awkward was that?
And this is why you don't use a cell phone to do a live stream, Harry.
Did you just catch all of that on the show?
I at least caught your part of it.
Oh, wow. That's embarrassing.
Well, that's why you need to go start using your laptop and get a webcam, Harry.
Probably.
You make more money than I do. You can afford it.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So anyways, what is the next decade going to hold? Religion News asked scholars, faith leaders, activists, other experts to reflect on some of the biggest shifts in religious landscapes they've seen over the last 10 years, as well as the biggest themes in the world of religion that they expect to emerge in the 2020s. So, let's take a look at things. This opinion comes to us from Kayati Joshi, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, saying there's going to be a reckoning for religious minorities in the U.S. and India. Let's find out more what she means by a reckoning as far as that goes. So she says the past decade has seen America's immigrant religious minority communities emerge with effective and forceful self-advocacy. Hindu temples, mosques, and other houses of worship are suing for the right to build rather than avoiding conflict and settling for inferior locations as many previously did. Sikh Americans have fought for the opportunity to serve in the military, police, and secret service while observing their faith's tenets. These groups are staking their claim to physical and rhetorical space in the public square. Simultaneously, segments of white Christian America, it's a loaded statement starting out, fear the nation is losing its identity. This fear has resulted in vocal and violent religious discrimination. The Muslim ban, which that really, it wasn't really a total Muslim ban, but okay. State-mandated teaching of the Bible in public schools, something that I am vehemently against and always will be, and laws barring teacher from penalizing students who give faith-based answers in science class. That is one of my biggest problems right there. So let's stop and talk about that for a minute.
Which part? Because there was a lot of loaded statements there.
There were a lot of loaded statements. So, you know what? To avoid some aspects of politicization of all this, let's talk about the two key religious issues in that: the state-mandated teaching of the Bible in public schools and laws barring teachers from penalizing students who give faith-based answers in science class. And the translation for that one is laws barring teachers from penalizing students who give wrong answers in science class.
I don't think that it is really appropriate to give religious answers in a science class. I think that it is definitely appropriate to give religious answers in a sociology class or a...
Perhaps if that is the topic of discussion. Sure.
Yeah.
That's fine. If it's relevant to the topic of discussion, that's fine. But I very much have a big problem with these state boards of education that are trying to stop teachers from essentially correcting students or marking their tests off by giving an incorrect answer, because that's what it is.
Yeah, and something like science, I can't see anything a foot to stand on, so to speak.
No, there is no foot to stand on that point. Completely no foot to stand on with that.
Like that's like someone trying to solve an algebra test by doing an interpretive dance. Like you may feel correct in your answer, and your interpretive dance may be the correct pathway for your life.
Right, your interpretive dance may clearly communicate 2 + 2 = 4. However, that's not what the teacher meant when it says on the test, show your work. So at that point, no, I'm sorry, you still got it wrong. That's how that works. I mean, the answer to how many years ago or around what time did the asteroid or meteor hit that caused the extinction event for the dinosaurs? The answer is not, well, that didn't happen because the devil planted fossils for us to find. That's not the answer. The answer is 65 million years ago, roughly, give or take. So it's an argument that because they chose to give this particular incorrect answer, that's somehow okay and they shouldn't be penalized for that.
I was homeschooled with a religious-based curriculum, and they still had that stuff in there. It was like you need to understand how this works to be in a functional society.
But here's the thing: not every single homeschool organization is completely populated by fundamentalists.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I always.
Because the young earth,
but I guess I'm learning through this podcast that fundamentalism is somewhere further thing. Right than where I'm at.
Yeah, that fundamentalism is not a good thing.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, to some degree, evangelicalism, the way it is in this country, is not really a good thing.
I feel attacked.
Yes, there are some. You look so victimized.
Yeah, just look at me hurting right here on my comfortable couch.
Oh yeah, such pain, much agony.
Yeah. The more interesting question that she brought up is something that I hadn't heard of, but makes complete sense. Is suing for better placement of temples.
Yeah, and that's fine. I'm entirely okay with that. I mean, because there have been instances, I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but I have seen in the news here and there where places where, say, a Sikh house of worship or something that's not Christian or Jewish has put in to build there has been denied or blocked by the city council, only to be granted to a Christian or Jewish organization or something of more mainstream to the area.
Yeah.
not even a year later in some cases.
That's terrible.
I mean,
Like,
if that's not religious discrimination, I don't know what is.
yeah.
But it's mostly happening in these kind of hole in the wall, kind of far right leaning towns.
Which is really weird because you would think that properties wouldn't be as competitive in those areas.
It's not about the property being competitive, it's about the area as a whole. Like, for instance, you. Oh, crud. Okay. For instance, Dallas, Texas, okay?
Okay.
Or actually, no, we'll use Houston. Okay, say that you have a really good job on the north side of Houston.
Mm-hmm.
What makes more sense? To try and move into the north side of Houston and pay a crap load of money, or to live about about 45 minutes to an hour away in somewhere like Conroe and then just commute? Because at
I
that
mean,
point you would probably still save money making the commute, even with wear and tear on the vehicle, gas and all that, driving in North Houston than you would be, and living in Conroe, than you would living in North Houston.
that's kind of a personal preference because for me it'd be as close as possible.
Right, but see, that's a personal preference. But also say that you have a job that, okay, yeah, there's that personal preference aspect of it, but also not every job in Houston pays enough to where you can afford to live in Houston. Let's face it.
Yeah.
If you're working at McDonald's, you can't afford to live in Houston.
Yeah.
Or if you work for, hell, if you work for as a garbage collector in the city, they make pretty decent money. Most between $12 and $15 an hour, depending on the city. That's barely enough to cover rent
Yeah.
in a town like Houston. Whereas you take that $12, $15 an hour job, you burn a little gas to commute, and you come and you live in somewhere like Conroe. Well, hey, your cost of living just dropped by 30% almost.
Yeah.
I mean, so in these smaller, more rural towns that are almost satellite towns to these large metropolitan areas, it makes sense because if you have immigrant families that are coming in and they're not, and they may not be college educated, they may be coming in and working manual labor jobs and stuff like that. Okay, so they need a place to live, but they also want a place to go to church. And so they start moving into these smaller towns around the big cities. And that's when a large enough population comes up. That's when they say, "Hey, let's go ahead and build a house of worship here." And that's when you start having those problems. Because that's where you usually see cases like that happen.
Yeah.
It's not so much the fact that it's a little town, it just so happens that it's a little town right outside of a major city.
I guess I could see that.
And I mean, okay, let's say that you have enough of a population to justify a house, a Sikh temple or whatever, and you live in Kingwood, Texas. And there's two plots of land that could be built on. Who do you think Kingwood, Texas is giving that land to?
Well,
A Christian church or a Sikh temple? And do you honestly think they care exactly how they go about doing it?
I mean that's almost a little loaded just because of current events in specifically Harris County. That
Well, okay,
like
well, let's just say literally anything that's not a Christian church.
I mean, it's probably just going to boil down to who's got more specific influence, like what businesses are. I mean, I don't really know, but I feel like it's whoever is more likely to influence the commissioner's court or whatever.
Which, given the area, given the mentality of the area, it's most likely going to be the white conservative Christian quote unquote coalition of the area that's going to win out as far as influence in the commissioner's court on that one. Because that's who's on the commissioner's court.
I mean, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I understand, like, in theory what you're talking about. Yeah.
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 But anyway, moving on. So, looking at the state-mandated teaching of the Bible in public schools. Now, this has a lot of problems with it, I think. Number one, there should be no state mandate on something like that. If they want to introduce an elective class on, say, religious studies, and they're going to cover multiple religions, and they're going to do it properly, okay, that's fine. I don't really have an issue with that. If that's something that is of interest to students and that's something they choose to study, that could go hand in hand with a good philosophy curriculum, if that's something offered at a high school level.
I think in a literature course, it would be appropriate to have different cultural allusions that relate to different religions, because there's different things in different religions that are relevant to kind of understanding historical references when people talk about things.
And they already do use religious texts in that one. Like, for instance, I can never remember the name of the reverend who wrote it or whatever. But I remember in high school in 11th grade, we had to read and do a paper on the sermon "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God."
Yeah, Jonathan Edwards.
Edwards, that's right. No, it was Jonathan something. So, I mean, like, to some degree, okay, that's fine if you're pulling excerpts and stuff like that, but if it's just a class and you're going to learn the Bible in this class, no, that's bullshit.
Yeah, like, I guess if you were to teach the Scarlet Letter, it would be very relevant to understand a little bit about the Bible. And if you're going to teach,
I mean, and if I remember right, that particular Nathaniel Hawthorne book, they do quote a couple of things in there, so it would be nice to have the relevant context to the verses being discussed. Okay, fine, but by no means is there a requirement for a companion course where all you study is the Bible. And at that point, you're going to have this massive argument. I can already guarantee you a massive argument over which version to use, because there are so many different translations, and
King James all the way, baby,
and all of them think they're the right one. Well, okay, but still, which version? Which King James version? Do you want NKJV? You want KJV? Do you want the 1599 Geneva Standard? Do you want the 1611 KJV? Do you want the 1615 KJV? At that point, which one do you want? Because there are so many. It's complete bullshit. All that is, and in the situations where I've seen it, because it has been put forth in Texas more than once to institute a Bible study curriculum in public school, and every time it's been purely for the reason to instill Christian values in today's youth. That's not what school's for. If you want to do that as a parent, fine. That is not the school's job.
That's what Sunday school's for.
Exactly, but that don't happen on the state's dime. At least not directly. I mean, like, by not paying taxes, you could maybe have a bit of an argument there. But either way, so, moving on. She says she's keeping an eye on the growing bonds of nationalism and religion in America as well as in India. yeah, nationalism in India is something to pay a lot of attention to, especially with the CAA and NRI. In both officially secular democracies, a rising tide of thought and official action links national identity with the majority religion. In India, that's very much been the case, especially under Modi. And if that pisses somebody off, I don't care. Notions of quote unquote real Americanness weave together whiteness and Christianity. I disagree with that. Although in some parts of the country, I will agree with the Christianity part. The whole whiteness thing, that's a political thing, so I'm not going to bother with it because that's not the cut of the jib of this show, of this channel.
Well, there is a little bit of a very unfortunate movement that I've seen where they're equating Europeanness, descent of European background, with being tribally religious. I've seen a little bit of a rise in that, and that's pretty disturbing. And that's kind of like quote unquote whiteness, but it's really kind of like a return to tribalism.
Well, that may be something to keep an eye on and see if maybe any cult-like behavior starts coming of that, and then maybe there might be a justification to do a show on that.
Yeah, I think you and I have been arguing with a particular person who holds those beliefs.
Oh, yeah.
That will not give a platform to.
No, I'm happy to have him on Discussions with Atheists, because remember that second aspect of the Shapiro School of Debate, embarrass him in front of as large an audience as possible.
Yes.
So at this point,
I mean, just like.
So at this point, hey, yeah, Jer, if you're listening, if you're watching, even though I know you're not, I'm happy to have you on the show, buddy. I mean, if you want, you can come on the show. I'll let you talk for a minute. I'm not going to let you ramble, and I'll expect you to, put forth some sourcing and whatnot like you had been in the Facebook discussion. Hopefully better ones than you've been putting forth, but I doubt it. Anyways, moving on.
I have popcorn for that episode.
Says, while Indian national identity and policy grow increasingly Hindu, India has seen Hindu communities policing minorities' diets. Now, that's something I hadn't heard of. That may be something we need to find an article on so we can do a show on that.
What was that last part about diets?
It says India has seen Hindu communities policing minorities' diets.
Yes, I've seen that firsthand.
So we need to try and find an article on that to bring that up and discuss that. Maybe if we can get an update on CAA and what's been going on over there under the Modi regime, we might be able to find some more information on that. So that's your project for the week already. Dig up stuff on that.
Okay. I can't just speak from personal experience?
No. People expect to see a story.
I can tell stories.
Get it published. Get it published somewhere, and we'll talk.
This is publishing.
No, I mean like legit. Write a book. I don't care. We'll talk about your book.
You know I'm lazy.
I know. That's why you co-host.
Yes. I do many things poorly instead of one thing well.
Well, eventually you'll figure something out. The Supreme Court resolution in favor of Hindus in the Ayodhya territorial dispute between a mosque and a Hindu temple, and of course the Citizenship Amendment Act, which singles out Muslims for less favorable treatment as immigrants and refugees, which we have talked about on this channel firsthand. Both nations approach a crisis point in her mind. In India, rising protests and the government's violent response will spark a reckoning about how the nation treats its minorities, and next year Americans will either re-elect a president who plays to the shrinking white Christian majority's basest xenophobic instincts.
That's not.
That's okay. That's a bit partisan.
That was a low.
Or a diverse coalition will elect a candidate whose vision of a more perfect union embraces religious difference. Joshi is a professor at Fairleigh Dickinson University and author of New Roots in America's Sacred Ground: Religion, Race, and Ethnicity in Indian America. Her new book, White Christian Privilege, will be published in 2020.
Where is that university, by the way? I'm just curious.
Fairleigh Dickinson?
Yeah.
Well,
to the Google.
Teaneck, New Jersey, private university.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's about right. Consult the Oracle of Google. All right, so that's coming from Luke Goodrich. Well, was there any real discussion to be had on this last paragraph here? I don't really see one, aside from the India situation is something that we will need to follow pretty closely. As far as this one right here, that seems primarily political, so I don't really see a lot of religious stuff to discuss about that one, in all honesty.
I just think that if there was another sociologist from the Midwest, that they would have had a completely different take.
And we may see that in here. Who knows? So this from Luke Goodrich. Says Supreme Court will rule during an era of unprecedented religious freedom conflicts. Okay. I can see that. He says one major shift in the past decade is that traditional Christian beliefs about abortion and marriage are increasingly viewed by some parts of society as a threat to modern culture. Okay, to some degree, yeah, I would say a good chunk of America does view it that way. The result has been significant, unprecedented religious freedom conflicts involving traditional Christian views. Examples include the over 100 federal lawsuits filed over the contraception mandate, culminating in the Hobby Lobby and Little Sisters of the Poor decisions by the Supreme Court, which we've covered the Little Sisters decision, and the increasingly common litigation over conscientious objections to same-sex marriage by religious wedding vendors, schools, counselors, and adoption agencies. Okay, so here's what I'm going to go with on this one. This last one needs to be addressed to an extent. Common litigation over the conscientious objections to same-sex marriage. And then it's talking about religious wedding vendors, schools, counselors, and adoption agencies. So, if you're a private business, such as like it was Masterpiece Cakes or whatever the hell it was, and you decide you don't want to do that, that's your prerogative as a business owner to refuse service at that point.
Well,
and
technically, you're not even refusing service. You're refusing a custom order. You're still providing service because it is against the rules if you're doing interstate business to discriminate against providing equal service.
Right. Well, but Masterpiece Cakes was not doing interstate service, I don't think.
But they still said you can have whatever cake from the book you want. We're just not going to do a custom job.
Right. So, but I can see where the argument there could be made that equal service was not being provided, in that a hetero couple could have walked in there and ordered a cake that was custom, and they would have done it with no problem.
Yeah.
So I can see where that argument can be made. Now, if they had said that we're just not doing custom cakes, and they stopped doing custom cakes for everybody, okay, fine. That's equal treatment at the very least. But that seems somewhat targeted. That being said, to some degree, I think a business owner should be allowed to do with what they want on their business as long as it doesn't violate the law. And that couple has every right to go get a cake from somewhere else, but at the same time, completely deride and ridicule that other business for refusing to work with them. Because if you're going to engage in business, if you're going to work with the public, well, then okay, then you either have to be comfortable doing a job like that, or don't do it at all,
I
or
think
or
what
or
one
or don't do it, and don't be surprised when it comes back and blows up in your face when they start telling every single person they know that they received arguably prejudicial treatment, and the business goes under because they can't get a customer now.
Yeah, I think the concern is not that they would lose a popularity or foothold, but that in at least one or two of the cases, a attorney general's office was more or less systematically harassing the business in order to entrap them. There was like an investigation into a cake shop that was ongoing. It wasn't just, oh, here's something they did. Let's do something on it. It's like, how many more people can we go to order a cake just so we can get get more cases against them? It's like, really? You don't
Right.
have
It's basically
important to do?
entrapment to try and form a class action suit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah. But when it comes to things like schools, counselors, and adoption agencies, that's where you're getting into some really muddy waters there, especially with adoption agencies. I mean, if they're entirely religiously funded and um, they don't receive any state or federal funding of any kind,
Hmm.
then maybe, and I mean maybe, you might accidentally have a religious freedom argument there. But if it's a state agency, no, you've got nothing. You're over a barrel.
You know what you should do? I know
Hmm.
it's kind of a divergent thought, but do you know about the Duplessis orphans?
No.
You should look that up as it relates to that particular question. I think
Really?
you would find that fascinating.
Okay. I may have to ask you to send me a link to that later on. But anyways,
Okay.
um, so he says in the next decade, expect SCOTUS to issue multiple significant decisions on religious freedom. Yes, I can definitely see that. In the context of abortion, expect the court to affirm the long settled principle that no person can be forced to participate in an abortion in violation of his or her religious beliefs. And in the context of same sex marriage, expect the court to make good on its promise in Obergefell, its landmark decision affirming same sex marriage, that religions and those who adhere to religious doctrines may continue to advocate with utmost sincere conviction that by divine precept, same sex marriage should not be condoned. So, given the current stacking we have on the Supreme Court, for the most part, yes. Except the swing vote in both of those areas is going to be Chief Justice Roberts. Because you have four that are fairly conservative, and you've got four that are relatively liberal, and then you've got Roberts, who kind of occupies that middle ground.
I like Roberts.
He tends to lean a little more
Normally.
conservative than he does liberal, but I don't really consider that more of conservative thinking. I think he just errs in favor of what the Constitution says.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. I don't like the Supreme Court is not where legislation is made.
Yeah.
That's not where policy is decided. And Sonia Sotomayor can take a long
Don't say
walk with
anything
that
you're
one.
going to regret.
I don't have any issues with Sonia Sotomayor as a person. That particular statement, saying that the Supreme Court is where policy is made, I have a problem with, because that goes against the spirit and the call of duty that was put forth at the country's founding for the Supreme Court.
It also goes against the dictionary definitions of legislate and judiciate.
Exactly. It oversteps the judicial mandate, I think. But anyway, continuing on. In other words, the court will recognize that our country is deeply divided on matters of religion and sexuality. Yeah, it is. And it will hold that the government doesn't get to pick one side of that divide and punish everyone who disagrees, but must instead protect the equality and dignity of both sides of the debate. Of that, I kind of tend to believe, except I don't think that religious institutions should be given special treatment.
I have a solution for all this, and I will
that?
get that solution implemented
What's that?
as soon as it doesn't get killed in committee. We'll worry about that later when it actually gets pushed through, but I'm working on solving that problem, sir.
Making churches pay taxes?
No.
Oh.
Be gone with you.
I mean, they seem to want to get involved in the political process. They seem to want to insert themselves into policy-making decisions. So,
I have heard a argument recently where I don't know how I want to describe him, but a pro militia, staunchly right wing political activist has been encouraging certain churches to reject their 501c3 position so that they can embrace their full freedoms of being able to basically say whatever they want.
True, because for those of you who may not be familiar with, in the United States, a religious organization that falls under a 501c3 tax status cannot endorse a political candidate. It is actually in violation of that particular nonprofit tax status to endorse a political candidate of any kind on either side, whether Republican or Democrat.
They have to be pretty much fully charity-based or religious-based.
Mm-hmm.
They can't really get too much into politics. They can say that there's certain principles and ideas that they support, but they can't go so far as to be partisan or
say you should vote for this particular candidate because he or she evokes the principles that I agree with.
Yeah,
they cannot make that statement.
A common thing you would hear in a church around election times that wants to get political would be, just remember, like you might hear a preacher say something about like, just remember the importance of the innocent lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's code for vote for the pro-choice or the pro-life candidate.
Exactly.
But it could also easily be vote for the person that wants to abolish the death penalty. So, you know that.
True, and I'm all for abolishing the death penalty for the most part, and this is mainly because it's obvious that the death penalty does not serve as a deterrent, because crimes that end up being a death penalty case are still occurring, and on top of that, even in the state of Texas, it's actually far more expensive to execute somebody than it is to imprison them for the rest of their life.
Yeah, I've found myself leaning more toward getting rid of the death penalty in the past probably decade or so, as I've become more aware of just exactly how many people on death row are innocent.
Yeah, with the extreme unreliability of our judicial system.
Because we straight up got, how many, in order to keep it going, how many innocent people are you okay with killing so that you can kill X number of guilty people? Like one innocent person, as long as you can kill 10 guilty murderers?
No, I would say I would fall under the category of I can't remember who said it, but I would rather see 10 guilty men walk free than to convict one innocent person.
There you go.
But yeah, no, that's my take on it. Anyway, looking further, and it will hold. Yeah, we've seen the rest of that one. So, Warda Khalid, Muslim political engagement will reach new heights. Okay, so I'm not really going to cover this one just because this is purely political, even though there is a slight religious bent to it. It's just talking about the building of political capital within the Muslim community. If you'd like to read more about that, link to the articles in the description below. Don't have anything against it. It's just I would rather avoid politics as much as possible, and we've already gotten too deep into stuff like that. So this one's interesting from Ryan Burge. Interested in the rise of the nuns, keep an eye on the year 2029. He said he wanted to predict what American religion would look like in 2030 by extending the current trend lines of the 7 major religious traditions in the U.S. More specifically, he was interested in how long it would take for the religiously unaffiliated, who have seen major gains over the past decade, to clearly be the largest group in the United States. The answer that was derived from this projection model is 2029. This is the point where the model says that if the so-called nuns grow at the slowest rate, they will still be larger than any other religious group, regardless of the margin of error. At the time, the 2 other large religious groups in the U.S., evangelicals and Catholics, will make up about 22% of the U.S. population if the current trend holds. The only religious tradition that will sustain serious losses is mainline Protestants. These are the moderate forms of American Protestantism, typified by the United Methodists and Episcopalians, which, oddly enough, has the largest concentration of, well, like I said, we're not getting political on that one. Today they make up about 10% of Americans, but in 2030 that will be cut to just under 5%. So they're going to lose about half, predictedly anyways. That result is stunning considering that this group made up 30% of the population in 1976, so it's been in steady decline for the past, well, nearly 50 years. At the same time, it is noteworthy that for black Protestants, Jews, and those of other faith traditions, typically Mormons, Buddhists, Muslims, and Hindus, the next decade will likely be one of stability and consistency. Obviously, projecting religious demography into the future is a difficult proposition, and a number of factors could make these predictions look rather silly, including national tragedies, spiritual revival, things like that. However, it is undeniable that American culture and politics will slowly begin to change as the nuns continue to rise. So he wrote a blog post about it called For Religion in Public, where he talks more about the assumptions that are built into that model. So, what you think about that one, Harry?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a theme that you've brought up in the past with other articles.
Yeah. In a couple of the Pew Research articles that we looked at, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking he may have a point, but it is interesting to see how the stability in certain religious groups, how that'll pan out, as well as if there's going to be any increases in other religious groups that up until this point have just kind of been finding a foundation. I don't know if some of the newer religions that have really gained a foothold or a presence probably in the last 40 years, if you can consider their past trends to be consistent, especially with the political changes that may have been happening in the countries that where a lot of people may have moved from.
True, that is a possibility. As far as consistency goes, I do agree that for the most part, those will remain relatively consistent. And I think one of the reasons for that will be because they're, at least for some of those mentioned, well, actually all of them mentioned, there's a few key things that are really intrinsic to that, such as either geographic location. They all tend to congregate and live in a particular part of the country, and also, one thing that a lot of people may not like to look at when it comes to Uh, Religion is that some religions, because of the regions of the world from which they originate, they tend to hold fast to ethnic lines. That's not to say that they will always do that. In fact, there are quite a few non-Arabic Muslims that I've encountered. In fact, I would almost say that I've encountered as many non-Arabic Muslims as I have Arabic Muslims. Uh, but some religions do tend to follow a particular ethnic trend. That whatever the population of a particular ethnicity is, that tends to be somewhat related when you look at it from census data, anyways. That's not saying that, okay, because they're this ethnicity, that they are going to be this particular religious affiliation. That's not it.
But it's more like saying that when you compare it to other religions that have a spread amongst a population,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same thing. It may not go across the board throughout the entire population and behave the same manner.
Right. It doesn't travel as well, basically. But anyways,
Or it travel better within specific communities in terms of just
also true.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Like for instance, when we saw there was a rise in Islamic conversion in some of the U.S. prison population.
yeah. What years were you looking at for that?
That's been something that was. It's something that has kind of moved from state to state over the years, but it was at its biggest somewhere in the 1970s and 1980s.
See, and this is kind of going off on a tangent, but that's interesting because that's not really that there is a difference between Islam and the Nation of Islam, and a lot of the prison conversions were specifically Nation of Islam.
Okay.
So there's similarities in some of the theological texts,
Mm-hmm.
but the religion itself is distinct and different.
Okay. Well, I think that may be getting more into particular political arenas that we may want to avoid for now. Not for anything other than it doesn't quite fit the flow of the show for more than anything else. And we have a cat attacking the camera. That's awesome.
Yes, we did.
So,
Sorry about
Roy
that.
Speckhart, the future of religious neutralism. Talking about the differences between humanists and things of that nature. So this is the number of people who are humanists is on the rise, and young people who left religion are already leaning toward not returning, which shows a trend of what is to come. So this kind of actually goes hand in hand with what Ryan Burge was saying here. Anyway, but this need not be viewed by many of the faithful as something to fear, for it will usher in an establishment of religiously neutral secularism that will derive respect for people of all faiths and philosophies. For the most part, yes, I see that. Unfortunately, the interim may be difficult as the U.S. becomes more diverse on religious questions. Religious nationalists who do not share this sentiment of mutual respect and pluralism will feel like they are losing a battle of cultural dominance. Their current hold of our government makes them a major obstacle to a respectful world, and they won't let go easily as our trajectory takes us further away from their unyielding and backward views. Instead, such religious supremacists, interesting label there, will take defensive action to desperately hang on to power, not only to sustain their bigotry, but try to make it the law of the land. This means there's still plenty of work ahead of us to welcome a respectful world for all. Humanists and progressive religious communities will need to come together to make this a reality. I see issues like that mostly happening on a state and local level, not necessarily a federal level.
I see issues like that mostly happening on Reddit.
I mean, what?
Like that
It's
that
talking
sounds
about
like
it's talking about government, not
I know, but the personality and the behaviors that he's describing sounds like the typical internet troll that I've encountered.
yeah. I mean,
Unfortunately,
that does kind of sound like Paul Board a little bit. I mean, yeah, there is a bit of a troll tinge to that. Not in what he's saying, but in
not from
the
him,
no,
the
not
popular.
from him, but who he's describing. Yeah, that does kind of sound almost like he's describing a 4chan troll.
It really does, yeah. It like I could expect that he's if someone were like, "Could you show us a picture of what you're talking about?" and he just picks up like the uh, oh, what is it, like the Crusader meme that you run into?
The Deus Volt memes.
Yes,
Yeah,
like just like this. This is what I'm talking about. These are
yeah.
the people that are going to try to grasp at straws for the last vestiges of power.
Okay, Robert P. Jones, a post-white Christian America hits the polls. This looks like it's all talking about, yeah, this is all politics, GOP, and whatnot, so I'm not even going to bother with that one. Okay, Simranjit Singh fighting against the new normal of religious and ethnic nationalism. Okay, let's see what this one's about. Um. Okay, so this one I'll go ahead and cover. Uh, So the executive order designation of Jews as a race in the United States, bans on religious symbols in Canada and France, the Citizen Amendment Act in India. Each of these represents a troubling trend of backlash against the freedom of religion in what are ostensibly democracies driven by nationalist sentiments. And some of those, yes, I will agree with that. The phenomenon of religious nationalism and ethno-nationalism is not new, but it has increased steadily over the past decade and has boiled over all across the world. This is our new normal, and it has profound consequences for societies that have drawn their strength and prosperity from pluralism and diversity. The next decade will determine which of the two paths we decide to traverse as a global society. Do we continue down the road of exclusivism, ethnocentrism, and dehumanization, or can we reverse this trend and move back toward our values of inclusivity, human rights, and justice for all?
What is he referring to when he says American legislation to define Jews as a race?
No, not legislation, an executive order designation. That actually was something that Trump wrote and signed an executive order on.
Yeah, but what's the context of that? Because if I remember, the purpose was to address anti-Semitism and hate crimes by saying that attacks against synagogues would be considered like a racial hate crime.
I think I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's it was a rather two-faced type thing.
Okay.
Um, the reason being because there was this push from the right saying that being anti-Muslim or anti-Islamic was not racist because Islam is not a race; it's a religion. And then for that executive order to come out from a Republican president saying that now being Jewish, especially when they're talking about attacking a synagogue, that is a race, uh, versus adopting the same uh, line of answering as they were for when it was about Islam, it comes across as two faced. So yes, that can very much ring of ethnic nationalism or religious nationalism on that one.
So, all right, time for me to say some stuff that's probably going to be taken out of context and used against me 30 years from now. But it seems like there's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? That's little tiny differences that a lot of people are overlooking. What's the word for that?
People are missing the forest for the trees, or you're talking about people missing nuance.
Yes, nuance. There we go. There's a lot of nuance that a lot of people are missing here, which is
Okay.
that, first of all, let's just go ahead and say that any of the terrible acts where people had been attacking mosques are terrible. That's awful. No one approves of that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do approve of it, then I don't want you as a friend, and
Oh
I
yeah, no,
might
I'm right there
open
with
to
you.
debating and
Even if I
arguing you.
do, and that
Yeah,
and that's even coming from someone like me who views not Islam specifically, but religion in general as pointless and not really any good for society overall
so so
and backwards. Yeah.
when people are attacking a mosque, that is a hateful act that is not just against the religion, but is specifically against the race associated with that religion. That's what they were doing. That's
Mm-hmm.
why they targeted that mosque.
Yes.
There's the nuance where people will say things against Islam as a religion. They're not attacking people, they're not being violent, they're making criticisms of the religion. And when they make those criticisms publicly, people call them racist. And a lot of their defense is, my problem isn't with a people who practices this religion. My problem is with the religion itself. But instead of saying that in an articulate way, they say Muslim is a religion, not a race.
Right. And because that's what they say, it's not so much, again, it's never been about what you mean behind what you say. It's always
Yeah.
been, what did that person say? What are the words that came out of their mouth? What did they type in that tweet? What did they say
Yeah.
on Facebook? What did Karen say to Joe Bob on AOL Instant Messenger? Whatever. That's the thing. Is okay, that's fine. If you're not able to articulate, if you understand you are not able to speak on these issues in an articulate enough way as to be understood, then don't talk about it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree there. If you're not going to be a good person to describe what you're saying, then was it better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open it and be proven?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, better. Yeah, better to hold your tongue and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and show the world.
So there are people who do use that quote about Islam is a religion, not a race, because they want to
Mm-hmm.
say some hateful things about people, but then they want to hide behind their little brick wall of saying, "But I'm only talking about the religion." People
Right,
just
and that's the
like,
thing though. But that's been
yeah,
the majority behind saying that statement,
yes,
and that has all come from either the far right or the religious right.
so there's
And
that.
so with that having happened, and then for that executive order to come out, and I said we weren't going to talk politics, but apparently we're talking some politics today. For that executive order to come out, that completely undermines everything they've said about that.
Well, what I
And
was going to say is
so
that,
it speaks of a form of favoritism.
well, but the thing is that when I hear people, and I have to talk with people that disagree with me on things, otherwise I won't ever have a chance to reach across and change people's minds. That's just how debate goes. But whenever
Exactly.
I hear people give criticisms or say hateful things about Jewish Americans
Mm-hmm.
or Jewish people in general, they don't have theological problems with Judaism that they're intellectualizing.
No, they're just
They're
anti-Semites.
they're just saying hateful things about Jews and based upon historical stereotypes and misinformation.
Well,
And so,
that's also been the case with um, the discussions on Islam. Is that it's been that exact same thing. The overwhelming majority of people who are saying Islam is not a race, it's a religion, have been using that to somehow to quote unquote shield themselves, um, to cloak themselves in that, to say intensely bigoted and hateful things.
There have been people that have done that.
Well,
Yes.
that's been the majority. That's what I'm saying. And so
Yeah.
the majority of people who make that statement, who use that sentence, yes, they're doing it to hide under the guise of I'm criticizing religion when they actually don't know the first damn thing about it, other than the fact that it's not Christian, therefore they think it's bad, or it's not insert X here, and therefore I think it's bad.
I guess what I see as the difference is whenever someone were to make a completely non-hateful criticism of something in the Torah.
Oh,
I don't hear
I'll make a criticism of it right now. The global flood didn't happen.
I don't hear people saying, "Well, you're only saying that because you're an anti-Semite."
True, but at the same time, I don't really hear people saying they disagree with something in the Quran and then be accused of being Islamophobic. I do see it from time to time, but it's not as common as it used to be.
Yeah, and
Because that particular form of identitarianism tended to die out pretty quick because it was largely levied against someone like Sam Harris,
yeah,
who is a brilliant debater and is actually a really good author. You should read The Moral Landscape if you haven't. It's actually pretty good if you're into
you'll
that
put a
sort of
link
thing.
below for like the required reading related to this video.
No, we're not going to go that far. We are going to continue on with the story, though.
Okay.
So talking about global society and this, that, and the other, we kind of covered all this stuff in our rambling a little bit. So let's hear from Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin saying that Jews prepare for a new and difficult year. He says that the Talmud says ever since the destruction of the temple, prophecy has been given into the hands of children and fools. He says, I am neither. But let me tell you what I see in the stars for the world Jewry in the coming year. The picture is not pretty. The past year has seen the rapid acceleration of anti-Semitic incidents, both in Europe and the United States. Yes, that has happened. The social contract, complete with an immune system that guarded against the excesses of hate, has vanished. And says, no, this is not Berlin of 1938, and yet it is disturbing and disorienting. European Jews are quote-unquote accustomed to this. It has been part of their narrative for the past 1,000 years. But for American Jews, this is something for which nothing in their history or experience has prepared them. He says, more disconcerting with the exception of certain major cities, synagogue affiliation rates are dropping, fewer young people are getting a quality Jewish education, with a shrinking sense of religious community, and less communal Velcro. I like that. Communal Velcro.
It's a really good metaphor.
I like that
That applies
metaphor.
to every religion too.
Well, no, I mean, I would say just as Americans, we need to have some
Yeah.
communal Velcro, some things that tie us all together. You know, some hook and loop going on there. Anyways, talks about them being less prepared. Says there's hope. Synagogues may be shrinking, but alternative kinds of communities and structures are growing. A number of Jewish startups and energy within them. There will be more. So in 2020, there will be more hate. Election year will cause more of it to spew out of the body politic, probably, and so on and so forth. Oh, KCA Randy has a interesting comment. He says most ex-Muslims I know don't like the term Islamophobic. They prefer anti-Muslim bigotry. And so yeah, okay, I'm right there with you because Islamophobic or Islamophobia is a buzzword. And so yes, if it's a bigoted statement, then yeah, there's a problem with it. However, I so this may garner me a little bit of criticism. I don't think it's bigoted for me to say that when I look at the Islamic world and I look at where Islam has been instituted as a theocratic government, that women are treated like second and third class citizens, and in some of those countries as less than human, I don't see that as a bigoted statement. I see that as a valid criticism of how that religion is being used in a political way to enforce some pretty egregious policies. And so
I would
that may garner me some criticism, but that's my thought on it. I would say the exact same thing if it was a Christian theocracy and it was saying the same thing, because when you look at Levitican law, the wife or women are considered to be subservient to men, uh, and not actually as equals within the marriage contract. So again, that criticism stands for all the Abrahamic religions.
I'll offer some criticism right here very, very quickly, which is I would say that in its definition that that statement would be bigoted because it specified countries where it was a theocratic government that was Muslim, but that statement is also true for any country that has ever had a theocratic government.
Yeah.
If you look at the history of every country.
Yeah, and Randy brings back up a very particular thing. Islam is a set of ideas, and it's right. I have no issue with a person who is Muslim. I have issues with the ideas within Islam, and I don't think people seem to be able to make that distinction anymore, because because of how much, when it comes to discussing something, it's started to become more that a person's emotions, a person's feelings matter more than than an actual substantive argument, than an actual substantive conversation where an actual issue gets discussed.
Here's a good example. You always use the term sky daddy with me,
Yes,
which
I
I
do.
find pretty offensive, and it lets
Except
me know
it except it doesn't target any particular religion.
But what I'm saying is that you use it. I find it slightly offensive, but at the same time, I know you don't personally hate me,
No.
and
It's a
I don't shut
criticism.
you
It's a
down.
criticism of your. It's a criticism of the belief. It's not a
Yeah,
criticism of you. Like, there is a difference between criticizing the person and criticizing the argument. Like, that's, and honestly, and here's the thing: there needs to be courses on logic and philosophy in high school. Even if you don't put philosophy in there, I would settle for a course on effing logic, because
I
logic is
good with it.
really not that difficult. And to teach people what a logical fallacy is and what good logic looks like when having a discussion, I think we would have a better prepared community of people coming out of schools to participate in society.
I think it'd be also good to have a course on how to take criticism and how to take unfounded insults.
I'm
So
pretty
you
sure you
just
could cover that in a course on logic, because again, logic can be covered in a single semester for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, saying ethereal sky daddy, it is intended to ruffle feathers. You know, Randy says it's intended to ruffle your feathers. Yes, it's supposed to. It's it's considered a valid form of argumentation. It's a reductio ad absurdum. It's to illustrate the absurdity of the idea. So yes, saying ethereal sky daddy isn't bigoted. Because guess what? Allah, ethereal sky daddy. Yahweh, ethereal sky daddy. Buddha, depending on which version of Buddhist you are, ethereal sky daddy.
And as offended as I am not trying to get you arrested for having said something I dislike.
And that's fine. And if someone tries to get me arrested for saying for me saying something that they don't like, that's fine. I'm happy to talk to them, but at the same point, it's like, no, I'm sorry. You don't get to shut me up just because you don't like what I say. If YouTube chooses to shut me down, okay, that's fine. They're a business, they chose to do that. Guess what? I'll go somewhere else. I hear they support live streaming on Vimeo now. It's like I'll find
That's going to
something
get a
to do.
strike against you right there, mentioning the competition.
Oh,
There's your first strike buster.
except that I don't work for YouTube, so eat my ass. I don't know. Right,
That was a
exactly.
pornographic take.
Exactly. Randy and I are right on the same wavelength on this one. He says I go out of my way not to not insult people, but I refuse to tiptoe around other people's religious beliefs. I agree with you, Randy. I'm right there with you. It's like I'll sit there and ridicule the Quran, I'll ridicule the Bible, I'll ridicule the Mormon add-on to the Bible or whatever the hell it was. I don't care. But that doesn't mean I don't like the other person.
Sometimes you just also happen to not like the other person.
Oh yeah, like when it comes to Steven Anderson, that dude's a prick. He is a bigoted, hateful bastard, and yeah, no, nobody should give him the time of day. You shut him up by ignoring him. Anyways, moving on down the road, new era for Latinx leadership. Okay, so that's not really going to be religious. Religious differences. Mark Silk, religious differences as national identity. Now that's something we can cover here. So, worldwide, the most consequential religion story of the past decade was the election of the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, as Pope Francis in 2013. Within the world's largest religious organization, Francis has dramatically restored the liberalizing spirit of the Second Vatican Council, much to the consternation of Catholic traditionalists in the developed world. He has also become the world's most important voice of conscience, emphasizing the plight of immigrants at a time of increased demographic dislocations, and perhaps most importantly, putting his moral authority behind the cause of combating climate change. During the next decade, the overarching story will be the ideological importance of religion in the domestic politics of nation-states. This includes the harsh suppression of Muslim minorities in Myanmar and China, the Modi government's effort to define India as a Hindu state, and the embrace of Eastern Orthodoxy in Russia. In the United States, partisan conflict over religious rights and values continues to intensify. Increasingly, differences over religion lie at the core of the politics of national identity. I don't really see anything to disagree with him on here.
I just don't really understand how the differences in religion are political differences. Like I can see them as
because that's
but...
well, okay. When you look at it this way, with the election of say Tlaib and Ilhan Omar,
okay.
So these are.
I get yes. That
okay,
one.
they're Democrats, but they're also Islamic, or they come from an Islamic background. So in that regard, you're probably going to see Islamic communities mostly vote towards the left. And when you look at Christianity and the breaks in the sects of Christianity in the United States, they also tend towards one side or the other. Like, for instance, the United Methodist Church and Episcopalianism, those largely tend to vote Democrat. But and depending on where you're at in the United States, Catholics also tend to vote heavily Democratic. But then you have other American Protestants, such as Reformed Presbyterian, Baptist, the Southern Baptist Convention. Those almost always vote diehard Republican.
I guess it depends on the issue you're looking at, because I'm looking at.
It tends to depend on the issue, yes.
Like universal health care, and it's like I don't really see how any religion is like, oh yes or oh no, just because of my religion.
No, but see, but you're talking about a particular issue. I'm talking about as a whole. When you look at the whole of the voting block at that point,
Yeah.
that's how that tends to fall down. That's where that tends to fall between the two. Oh, Randy's asking me a question again. It says, "Hi, I don't know your name. I'm Randy. I'm Drew. Randy. Uh, I I think I introduced myself at the start of every show, but there again, you don't always. You're not always here right when the show starts. So yeah. Um, let's see. Yeah,
You did, but
Randy
yeah, I was right.
Randy makes a very very good point. When Islam is a minority religion, they mostly go to the left, and then when it's the majority, they want very conservative laws. Hence, like when you see the attempts at instituting Sharia law zones and places like that. So yes, you do have.
So
He does have a point with that one. But before we get into that, he did ask another question. How
okay.
long have I been an atheist? Let's see, it's 2020. About 8 to 10 years. So just call it about a decade. Anyway, go on with what you're saying, Harry.
So that is, if you look at the different countries and you look at the representation and the group, that there is a correlation there, but that's correlation does not equate causality.
Right,
So
right. I'm not saying it's a causal link, but there is strong correlative value there.
so the statement it makes the assumption that as they get more popular, they
Right, that they will
start to
start voting
swing
along the
right.
lines of American conservatism, and no, they won't. They will vote. They will still probably vote very heavily Democratic, because at least when you look at how Democrats versus Republicans play out in the U.S. today, Republicans tend to lean towards small federal government and less federal involvement in the states, whereas with the modern Democratic Party, it tends to do more towards the opposite, increasing the size of the federal government and increasing the power contained within the federal government. And so, in that regard, I would see if if there was an Islamic majority in the country, they would still maintain um, Democratic Party membership for the most part. But if they gained enough political capital to like completely take over and turn this country into a theocracy of some kind, that's when you would see the harsher side of things come out.
But that's where the failure is in that logic. If you look at it historically, it's not based upon how popular or how large of a faction they have or the religion has within a country. It's based upon geography. So there's a historical concept in Islam where it's called the closing of the gates of Ijtihad. And that basically means that for certain populations, there was no longer going to be a further development of philosophy and scientific development. And that is right where you look at where Turkey is going
Mm-hmm.
east, is where you have more of the fundamentalists in terms of the theocratic nature of their governments.
Right.
So it's less about the religion and more about the theocratic culture within those areas. And that's where the revolution started to push toward a more dictatorship or fascist toward type of side.
Dictatorial type of government, yeah.
Yeah. As you move west through Europe and even countries in North Africa like Morocco, and going into the east or going up further west into America, you'll
Mm-hmm.
see a more liberalized, almost progressive ideology. For the most part, Muslims in those areas have been relatively modernized or westernized in terms of their ideas of the government and the separation between religion and government. It's not until probably the last 10 or 15 years where there's been a significant amount of civil wars post the Arab Spring, and even before that a little bit, where there's been a diaspora of populations that have grown up with a more theocratic, authoritarian idea of what the government should and shouldn't do,
Mm-hmm.
and now they're trying to find their place throughout the West.
Right.
If history is any kind of lesson, that will the children of those people who have had to flee will become a little bit more westernized with their thoughts on the government as they assimilate into that country.
Okay. Well, there you go. That's a pretty good breakdown there. So let's see. Collective leadership from church figures, streaming worship and stuff like that. Okay. That's talking about election cycles, shifting church priorities. You know what? Okay, I'll bring this one up because I believe in giving credit where credit is due, even if it's a long time overdue. So this is from Reverend Tom Reist. Pope Francis shifts church priorities. The election of Pope Francis and his impact on the Catholic Church is the most important news story for Catholics. He has refocused its pastoral priorities away from legalism to compassion and mercy. He has focused the public priorities of the church on refugees, the poor, and global warming. In the U.S., the sex abuse crisis in the Catholic Church has moved from protection of minors, which has been fairly successful, to holding bishops accountable for covering up abuse. The abuse crisis has also expanded to other faith traditions. For the country as a whole, the major shift has been the continuing growth of nuns as a percentage of the population, as discussed by 3 other people earlier in this article. Politically, not going to bother with that. Internationally, again, talking about Hindu nationalism in India, rise and fall of ISIS, the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar, and the Uyghur persecution in China. Over the next decade, he says, we will see more believers committed to protecting the planet and slowing global warming. More interreligious cooperation will take place at the same time that interreligious conflicts increase. Then he says Catholics will elect a new pope. Okay, yeah, that's been pretty standard lately. So, okay, all that aside, that's something where I would like to give a little bit of credit back to the Catholic Church on, is that they are finally no longer playing... here's the priest, hide the pedophile. And they're actually like, no, hold these jackasses accountable, prosecute them, lock them up. This should have started happening 70 years ago when this first started to become a problem.
Well, you can go back and look at the Borgias and say maybe.
I'm talking about at least in the United States.
Oh, okay.
Because he's specifically talking about the sex abuse crisis in the U.S. So in the U.S., this has been a distinct problem for at least 70 years. Because time and time again, we keep seeing instances of diaries, interviews, memoirs coming out of people going all the way back into 1950 and the early 1950s of being abused by a priest. Like Spotlight in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
They exposed a 40-year trend of ongoing abuse that stemmed all the way back to the 1960s, just in their diocese. And, at first they thought it was like 1 or 2 priests, and it was more like 90. So that was a big problem. But anyways, I think we've covered a ton of stuff today. We can keep going with more of these later on, although most of them I don't see having a whole lot of relevance to this channel. And we've been going for about an hour and a half now, so it's getting close to time for us to go ahead and call it for the evening. So if anybody has any questions over the next minute or two, go ahead and throw them in the chat and in the comment section here, and we're going to start wrapping things up for this evening. So, anything you wanted to pipe in on that particular topic, Harry, before we start moving towards the closings?
When you say that particular topic, you mean the stuff we talked about today?
Yeah. Just in general, the stuff we talked about today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to be more there's going to be more solidarity between the nuns. I think they're going to get together like the moral majority, the conservative Christians did,
Mm-hmm.
and have an ideology or start petitioning parties to listen to their beliefs more based upon the fact that they're lacking religious beliefs.
Okay.
Um, but I don't think that they're going to just completely become like 80%, 95% of the population, and there will be no more religious people left.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say there's never gonna be religion, or that there's gonna be a point where all religion goes away. I don't think that'll be the case. If that does happen, it'll happen probably in the next 2 or 3 centuries, not the next 2 or 3 decades, like what some people think might be
Yeah.
the case. At least that's the way I see things going as far as that goes. But at that point, we may see a whole new wave of spiritualism. Religion and religious belief has managed to hang around uh, all but since the dawn of human civilization. I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon.
Thank God.
Har hardy har 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 har. Christianity hadn't even been around since the dawn of civilization, nor has Judaism or Islam. So suck it.
What religion has been around?
What?
What religion has been around since the dawn of civilization?
Um, Zoroastrianism. Hindu. Both
I
those been
think there's
around.
been stuff before Hinduism.
There's been stuff before Hinduism, but like Zoroastrianism, that's been around since before any of the Abrahamic religions. And in fact, when you start looking at um, Zarathustra and Zoroastrianism as a whole,
Hmm.
yeah, there's some pretty hard, uh, like very hard parallels between that and Abrahamic religion. And being from the same region of the planet, it's not unlikely that um, that
It's like the King
Abrahamic
James version,
religions.
the NIV version.
Let's just say that I it would come as no surprise to have a stark causal link between Zoroastrianism and Abrahamic religion, because there's a lot there. I mean, when you get right down to it, like Abrahamic religions, they pick and borrow from a bunch of different cultures.
I think this is one of the things where your your previous description of how evolution actually works, as compared to like how most people think it works, is probably like they all kind of came from the same thing, but they're not necessarily that one becomes the other.
Yeah, pretty much. Uh,
Okay.
but here's the thing. But still, that would completely invalidate the religion at that point. The fact that it comes from that, it comes from those precepts and principles. Especially if
Not according to Baha'ism.
I that's barely a religion at this point.
I've studied them. They're cool people.
But see, that's the thing. Like, if anything was, I mean, damn, if anything could be argued as the official religion of Bill and Ted, Baha'ism
Yeah.
is it. Like, and that's really all it is. It's stay cool and be excellent to each other, and that's pretty much it.
I actually think I asked them that in the interview, and they were like, "Yeah."
Okay then. Well, anyways, thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you all enjoy the show, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. We will discuss some more articles. I found some more interesting things on the Conversations website, so we may be looking at those and seeing what trouble we can get up to with discussing those. Until next week, I am Drew, and that's Harry over there. Why are you waving a lint brush?
It's a microphone. I got 2 turntables and a microphone.
I think your company needs to drug test you. That stopped you real quick. Anyways,
their money.
remember to please like, comment, and subscribe, and also to hit the notification bell icon down below if you want to be on the show, Discussions with Atheist, or you have an article that you would like to see featured on the Sunday service. Please send a link to the Atheist Reformation at gmail.com with a brief description of why you want to see it on there and what it means to you and what questions you might have. Go for it, Harry.
Oh, one last thing I want to say. Thank you, Randy, for participating in the show.
Yes.
You actually have the name of my favorite atheist, the Amazing Randy.
Oh, yeah, James Randy. Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah, so thanks for tuning in, Randy. Always a pleasure to see you guys in here, and hope to see you all next week. Y'all have a great night.